Steelers Fury. SteelerFury.com.
Hey, once again, you've tuned in to the SteelerFury.com podcast, Pittsburgh Steelers show, as part of our pre-draft extravaganza. We've had episodes all week. Now, we're going to start with our pièce de résistance every season. This is our Steelers mock draft war room, where we debate the potential picks at every selection for the Steelers, and we come up with some sort of a consensus choice at each spot. We go through the whole draft, talk about a lot of prospects. It's probably my favorite episode of the year. I don't know about probably. It's totally my favorite episode of the year. So without further ado, here comes our Steeler Fury Steelers mock draft war room. Hello and welcome again to another exciting edition of the Steeler Fury podcast, the Pittsburgh Steelers show. This is probably our best episode of the year. This is the one that we both look forward to, and I think the three of us also simultaneously dread. This is the Steelers mock draft war room, where we go through all 7 picks of the Steelers have this year. We debate prospects and strategy back and forth, and then somehow we figure out a way to come to a consensus and make a selection at each pick that we may or may not immediately regret, or regret a year later, or look back on and be like, yeah. So before we get too far into that, I just want to say, pray for us. No, I just want to say thanks for joining us on the episodes this week. It's been a heck of a week for the pre-draft extravaganza, 5 episodes. So if you have a chance to check them out, you'll see Steelers needs in the offseason recap. You'll see small school and sleepers with Emory Hunt. You'll see a breakdown of old favorite, and I like to use the word old, Steel Perch from Steeler Fury and the years on the podcast, giving us his thoughts about the Steelers and overall the draft and overall draft prospects that we might not talk about otherwise. I will have an interview with a great guest who's in this draft class, and you're going to see today the Steelers draft war room. It may be a while, so get yourself a beverage and some snacks, maybe some popcorn, and also joining me for this, along with you, the listener and viewer. First of all, the nominal host of this shenanigans, Mr. Jeremy Kohlman. He's the one that looks like he's from Indiana.
Yeah, just maybe.
A little bit. Working on his Andrew Luck beard lately, the last year or two.
You know it.
And also working on the gun show, Mr. Korey Karboowsky. By the way, I was going to throw out your name as a potential draft selection since you are a member of this draft class, but I heard that you retired. So
yes,
are you officially retired? Like if some team came along and said, we would like to pay you money to long snap for us, would you?
I'm sure I could be pulled out of retirement if they were, giving me a little cheese, but
maybe not like the fan-controlled football league. It would have to be like at least the CFL or European League or something.
No, if they're just giving me some money, what's the harm?
Right.
By the way, you're talking about you need to get some cheese to play. Eric Swan, the last guy who didn't play college football that got drafted in the first round of the NFL draft, he played for 4 years because he wasn't eligible academically. He played for 4 years for $5 an hour. $5 an hour to play semi-pro football. So maybe if you should say more cheese than $5 an hour.
Yeah. No, I would not do it for $5 an hour.
Exactly. Anyway, let's talk a little bit before we start picking. One of us will sort of operate as the GM or just ultimate decision maker, tiebreaker. One as the offensive side of the football, offensive coordinator, offensive scouts. One is the defensive coordinator or scouts, and we will figure out a way to promote the idea of certain prospects, and somebody will decide. But before we get that far, I wanted to talk a little bit about draft strategy this year. I think it's kind of more important than ever in a way, with all the holes that the Steelers have, to at least consider the idea of a trade down, or what we're thinking we're going to do with our picks and I'm sure when we see the board, we might change our mind. But going into it, Jeremy, what were you thinking in terms of, in a vacuum right now? Are you thinking a trade down is a real viable solution for the Steelers in round one?
Well, I think 20 could be, that pick could be a lot of value for some teams that are particularly looking to move up, especially for, a wide receiver, team that needs it, like Buffalo. If they want to move up 8 spots, before like a Brian Thomas Jr. starts to really fall down the board, or maybe even go up and just make sure they get their guy, and like an Xavier Worthy type, because I mean, they could be the odd man out, if they wait all the way to 28, along as well with the Chiefs, honestly. Both those teams could use, well, especially the Bills, because I don't even know who they're throwing to anymore. But those two teams, strike me as two teams that would be aggressive to move up to get a for sure fire, round one wide receiver that can come in, play right away for their franchises. So just an option there. Maybe a defensive lineman starts to slip down a board for a defensive team that really needs the help. Not a lot of top defensive tackles, but you could start to see them really come off the board late. And traditionally, actually, in the actual draft, you start to see pass rushers even start to go in those last, that 20 round range when there's no consensus on, who's pass rusher 3, 4, even 5. So I think there's some opportunities to move up for premium positions that might not be rated extremely high this year on your big board that you see that might be there in the fall. So,
well, funny because, like I feel like there might be tiers this year, like of players that at certain positions that maybe there's a big drop off after pick 20. Some positions the team seems like
very well good,
plenty of guys. But what I was going to say in response to your first part of it, though, was I don't feel like there's any position the Steelers don't need in a way. It's like almost anybody that fell, you'd be like, yeah, that guy would look pretty good.
That'd be right.
So anyway, Korey, what are you thinking in terms of the tiers or in terms of this idea of a trade down?
I definitely think that it's viable. Now, what concerns me about trading down is we might favor a guy that you kind of think to trade back for, but then all of a sudden you're stuck with like an option C. So it's always tough to kind of pull the trigger on it because you never know how the board's going to fall after that.
Yeah.
The thing that I kind of like with trading down, obviously we're getting more picks later. But that's one thing that's kind of weird about our trades this year is we weren't really acquiring any additional picks. We were just kind of moving them around.
The board a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So additional picks would be nice. But, like Will said, it's not – we could use kind of any position. But me and Jeremy talked about it the other day. Once we get past, round 4, there's not really blinding, needs where you can kind of lean more towards some more BPA kind of stuff where it's not like we need to scratch in, 7 exact positions we need. So,
and I feel like the positions that the Steelers need the most right now, either because they don't have a starter or they have just a plug-in starter is not really what they want, are some of the deepest positions in the draft at, the slot corner, offensive tackle, center, and wide receiver, right? So it's not like there's not going to be anybody there. Even in round 6, if they got hung up and they wanted to take a BPA earlier than that, I think even in the 6th round where they're picking in the 6th, which is early, I think, right? So they would even have a chance there, I think, to get somebody viable to, that they might hit an Antonio Brown with or something, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, without further ado, I'm the oldest. I get to a point. I'm gonna fall on the grenade for the team and take the defensive coordinator for round 1, because not that it's impossible that we would take a defensive player in the first round, but it feels like it's going to be offensive heavy for the first few picks, maybe unless somebody falls to us, right? And I'm going to make Korey the offensive coordinator to get started, so he can talk about offensive line, his favorite subject, and then Jeremy, who will disagree with us apparently about our choices. That's what I hear. The rumor is, and I guess we'll figure out somebody to get started. We're going to use the PFN mock draft simulator, which I'm going to share the screen to that. And there's a lot of good options. Everybody has their own favorites. and I apologize to those that we didn't go with. All right, so it's picking Caleb Williams, Drake May, J.J. McCarthy, Nate Neighbors, Harrison Jr., Odunze, Fashanu, Dallas Turner, Latu, Fuaga, Nate Wiggins, Jalen Daniels at 12.
Oh,
God, crazy.
big one.
And Marius Mims at 14. Yeah, so before we get into our draft offers, what's his name? Marius Mims went 14 to New Orleans. Brock Bowers to the Colts. Joe Alt, number 16. Troy Fatano, man, I guess we could have been tempted to trade up for somebody like that. Jared Verse at 18 and Quinyon Mitchell at 19. That means our board looks like this, gents. Well, we're gonna propose people, but this is kind of what you see there. This is not a big surprise to me. What's left on the board here feels like pretty close to accurate. Maybe one or two names swapped out, but I'm the defense coordinator, right? So I will talk about some defensive prospects. Johnny Newton and Byron Murphy are on the board here. They're interior defensive linemen who have an unusual blend of, they're badass in the run game. They create havoc in the backfield, especially as pass rushers and penetrators. And my personal opinion for the Steelers is that we're long gone are the days of trying to find five techs that look like Aaron Smith and who are basically, taking up space against the run and letting linebackers make plays. I think what we're now looking at is nickel defense where you need those interior pass rushers in waves. Like that's the thing about Philadelphia is they keep waving in interior defenders. It gives them a big advantage because then guys are fresher later. San Francisco does the same thing. Part of the reason they acquired Javon Hargrave. I actually I have kind of a difficult time deciding which of these defensive linemen, but I'll say Johnny Newton is the guy that I saw on tape who I thought was the most exciting interior defensive lineman in this draft class. He's available to you at 20, which is incredible. He should be a top 10 pick. When it comes to edge rushers, I like the potential of Chop Armisen, but I don't know if I'm spending a first round pick to it, with the Steelers situation at edge rusher where they have a couple of good starters. But the guy that, I think deserves to be talked about here is Cooper DeJean. So to me, Cooper DeJean is a cornerback, but you could make the same argument even if he's a safety. The argument that he's a multi-tool player on your defense who could come in and immediately have an impact, and you can move him around. He could play outside corner for you. He could be a big slot, like a corner, the safety that comes down and plays in the slot. He can play over the top. He does a lot of stuff on defense, and that off-man coverage and his ability to play, quarters and off-man, I think is unrivaled in this draft class, or one of the very best at least. The issue with me for the Steelers is they really need a slot corner. They need an upgrade at outside corner, but they're a little bit more set than they are at some other positions. I love Cooper DeJean. Then you add in his return skills. He's one of the best returners in the last, maybe 10 years of college football. I just think he's a great player, a great football player. He could be Troy Polamalu in your defense if you want to use him that way. So I think it would be a little bit of a waste to use him like that. But I would have a hard time arguing with the GM if they said, screw all these offensive linemen that we need. We need a defensive playmaker like that. And you could go with Cooper DeJean. That's it for me for defense. And I'll now sit quietly while we pick an offensive player.
All right, Korey. Let's hear your pitch for the offensive side of the ball.
So the first guy that jumps out to me that's kind of value plus, need, it's Graham Barton out of Duke. He, I think he could stick a tackle if you really wanted him to. But if you go back and look at, his early years in college, he was a center and he has legitimate center tape. This would not be a Kendrick Green situation where we are playing a true guard and just bumping him to center. Graham Barton can snap the ball. Ironically enough, I think they've kind of similar profiles, Graham Barton and Jackson Powers-Johnson, but I have a little bit more concern about Jackson Powers-Johnson snapping the ball than Graham Barton. So I would be more inclined to recommend Graham Barton over Jackson Powers Johnson. Looking at the other guys, Michael Penix Jr. is on the board. I sure hope they don't go this route. This would not be an ideal first-round pick for me when we already have Justin Fields and Russell Wilson on the roster. It's just not really the direction I want to go. I'm a big A.D. Mitchell fan. I like Keon Coleman as well. And both of those guys, I mean, they could be instant impact players. We definitely need a receiver. And then when we look at the tackles, you have Kingsley and Will. Do you want to help me out with the last name?
Suamatea.
Suamatea. Okay, Kingsley Suamatea, who I think each of us are a fan of them, in a different way. And that really, we could not go wrong with taking him there. I know Jeremy likes Tyler Guyton. I'm not really the biggest Tyler Guyton fan, but I could definitely, that's the pick. I'm not upset. With my recommendation, I'm going to say Graham Barton is my 1A. And then, if you like Jackson Powers a little, I didn't even see the top of the board. So J.C. Latham, I'm a massive fan of. The big question with J.C. Latham, and it's kind of why I'm glad I'm not picking, you've got to be the one to tell Arthur Smith that you are not taking a mobile tackle. They're not mobile, but not a speedster at tackle. J.C. Latham is a phenomenal tackle, super, super good anchor. But then Brian Thomas Jr. is a extremely legitimate weapon at receiver. So I'm glad I'm not making this pick. If I had to tier my recommendations, I would go Graham Barton, J.C. Latham, Brian Thomas Jr., but I don't envy Jeremy's position right now.
And can I just add quickly? To me, I watch Barton, who, by the way, has nearly as many starts at center as JPJ has, Jackson Powers Johnson, but he has another 30 games starting at the other positions, So it's like Jackson Powers Johnson is really a one-season wonder. It's tough for me to get behind a center who has only played one season of football and has some issues in round one. That's what I would say about that. But Graham Barton moves like he moves with a grace and just like floats for a 300-pounder. It's sort of amazing to see his ability to move. He's got flaws like every player has, and will have to be coached. But I think he and J.C. Latham are really close to polished products. Like if you're looking for somebody to start day one, I think both of those guys could do it. But now, Jeremy, you get to tell us what you disagree about.
So I'm glad you both said that you like Barton. And maybe I've just seen some games of him that I haven't liked as much, but I'm a little bit concerned. It just seems like he gets walked back a little bit too much. Maybe I've seen bad games. I saw a game versus North Carolina where he did not look good at tackle. Now, I understand the projection is for him at center, so I will default to you guys. I did not see many games of him at center or snaps at center, so I just saw some concerning things at tackle, and I'm sure that's why a lot of teams are sliding him inside. But it just seemed like there were some issues with power potentially, and then it just kind of looked like he might have been a little stiff, which obviously would be negated a little bit. But with the league moving to more quick interior pass rushers, I don't know. It was just something that came across my mind the other day. I was like, I'm not quite as sold on him just sliding inside as much as as much as others are. I'm not saying he's a bad player or anything, just notable concern for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's valid. I think if you're trying to make a projection, like I said, at least he had center film to go back to. And, and the thing about his center film, that I'll say, whatever you think about his flaws at tackle, the thing about his center film was he was a true freshman and came in during the stretch run in the ACC when other guys are like already, hot and happening, and was either holding his own or actually dominating interior lines for like against North Carolina, against Florida State, against good teams, right? So that's all I would say is there's not nothing there. But I get it. I think you like to have a first round pick that you have no qualms about. I think that's better if you can find one, right? But I was going to ask a question about wide receiver, since Brian Thomas is the only name we mentioned here. I've been talking with Jeremy a little bit about this, but I'm not sure how the conversation you guys had in the first episode. But um, do the Steelers have a very specific kind of wide receiver that they're going to look for in an Arthur Smith offense? Because Arthur Smith traditionally doesn't use the slot wide receiver very much, and he likes big receivers. The guys that he's really fed the ball to or gotten the most targets the last couple of years are literally over 220 pounds. So it's either tight ends, H backs, or big wide receivers like an AJ Brown type or something. So I think me personally, if I'm picking for the Steelers to fit this offense, I think I'm picking almost exclusively until you get an outside wide receiver that can line up opposite George Pickens. Probably a guy that either can block or has shown the willingness or ability to block. And hopefully you're drafting somebody that's above average starter at that position. So I love a lot of the slot wide receivers in the draft. I mean, like some of my absolute favorites. But I just wonder if you agree with me that they're not necessarily looking for a slot guy here.
I think that, well, it kind of depends on how you view a guy like, I'm sure we'll talk about him, Xavier Legette. But I don't know, Ricky Pearsall that's a name that I've seen pop up for interest. And I'm not sure that they would necessarily shy away from a guy who's, willing to go and get his head taken off over the middle and has a little willingness to block. I'm not sure if the weight's a legitimate thing or that's just it happens to be the profile that they're looking for. I'm not sure if they have a set weight that they don't want to go under, or at least Arthur Smith. I'm also not sure, you want to say he's given the keys, but I'm not sure if you want to say that he gets final and complete say on his receivers. Now, that might not be the sign of a well-functioning offense and a well-functioning team, but I'm not sure if that's something we're going to have to abide by,
Well, I mean, it's not like we don't have any experience, talking about an offense that doesn't know what it's doing or has any congruity to it.
So. Yeah, guys that are misfits for their position.
So, but you're right.
I figured I just mentioned it though. I figured I just mentioned it because looking down the list, if you just want to get a wide receiver who can play and you don't care what kind of position or what style wide receiver it is, there's a million guys.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking for a more specific type, it's going to get interesting. It's going to get interesting to see if guys we think everybody's planning on somebody making it to round 2, our round 2 pick, but I just want to put out there that it won't shock me if we get stuck in a position later. I'm not advocating picking wide receiver first, but I'm saying we might very well get in a position where we're forced to take a wide receiver. It doesn't really fit what we want to do on offense. That's all.
And I just want one last thing before we make Jeremy pull the trigger on someone. I mean, looking at this, I think it's a combination. My best player on the board would be J.C. Latham, and it's at a position of need. So I don't really want to downplay that. It's just it would be a surprise if he got there. I mean, I know the board has him at 19, but, Arthur Smith likes these big guys who can run. So it's the question of, is J.C. Latham going to be close enough to that for us to even want him?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so we do have trade offers.
Yeah.
I guess we can consider them. The first one is to move down one spot in exchange for a 4th round pick
next year.
Next year, which doesn't help us any tonight, and we will forget about it by the time we get to next year. But it is not nothing. This one's crazy. Jacksonville wants to offer half their draft this year and the 2nd and the 3rd next year for picks 20 and 195. That seems like a long way to go down to 48.
Yeah.
And the last offer is very similar, 46.82. So,
well, shit. That means I don't have a bailout option.
you're really. I mean, here's what I'll say though: if you move down to 21, if your goal is to really move down, if you move down to 21, you might get an offer at 21 that is, like maybe somebody takes Johnny Newton or Byron Murphy, and some other team wants a defensive tackle, and they're willing to move up. I don't know. I'm not advocating one way or the other, but there's your options, brother. Good luck.
Yeah, right. Now, here's your grenade. Go fetch. I say we ignore the trade offers. I just don't know how realistic. Obviously, none of these are very realistic for what probably the Steelers would entertain outside of the Miami trade. And since that's not going to help us tonight, I think we can just avoid that. I'm not worried about next year. I'm worried about this year. You guys are right. This is a very, very tough position to be in because Brian Thomas is one of the guys I've been beating on my chest for a while now. And that would definitely give us 2 legitimate outside wide receivers because I think Thomas's best football is in front of him. So it's like we obviously need a number 2 wide receiver. Does that upset George Pickens that we spend a round 1 pick on a wide receiver? I know last year was not the best of years, but our wide receiver room definitely appeared diva-ish at the time. So maybe I don't want to upset the apple cart there. I don't know.
I think he better go out and show that he's a number 1 receiver if you're upset.
That's the other thing. Everybody's like, we need wide receiver too. Well, I love George Pickens. Korey and I beat the drum to death for him last year on this very podcast. But,
right.
Am I convinced that he's a 1? Not the way he was used. Maybe he could become a 1 for you, but he wasn't even playing the X position. So,
right. This is tough because
I do think if they trade for Brandon Ayuk or T. Higgins, it'll be upsetting to George Pickens because it's hard for him to get paid the most. Mm-hmm. If you bring in a first rounder, it's hard for him to think he's ever going to overcome that in terms of his,
right.
So yes, it's not nothing.
Yeah. And then you made a fantastic argument for the defensive tackles here. In a normal draft where we didn't have such big glaring needs, at some of these other positions, I'd say, yeah, I'm easily going to pull the trigger on one of those guys with an aging Cameron Hayward and oft injured Larry Ogunjobi, a disappointed, Isaiah Loudermilk,
I think it's a sneaky need because Cam Hayward, was hurt. Maybe he's going to bounce back and have another good year or 2, or maybe this is it. But they don't really have much there. It's only because we have these 4 other glaring needs are we like not talking about it more.
Yeah.
And me and Jeremy all made our pitch, or me and Will made our pitches. I really think you can't really go wrong here. And
that's what I was going to say. After you picked, I was going to say no matter what you choose, it's going to be both wrong and not right. I mean, it's going to be both right and not wrong. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, I'm going to take Tyler Guyton here.
No, just kidding.
Oh, there you go.
because like you said, Latham is not quite as good as a mover. And we're going to be running outside zone. We're going to want him on the move. I think Guyton's ceiling is sky high. His athleticism is just jarring, and to give, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, whatever future quarterback we have, 2 young offensive tackles and anything to get Dan Moore off the line. But I really like the idea of adding a bookend tackle here. I think there's some centers later in the draft that we can target. I mentioned I have an issue with Barton. Korey isn't quite as high on Jackson Powers Johnson as long as with you, Will, just lack of tape there, issues snapping. So I like Guyton there. I think it's a deep wide receiver draft. I think there's going to be some centers available later. But let's go ahead and solidify an offensive line that Weidl is a big fan of building through the trenches. So let's go ahead and get Guyton.
I just have to say I don't dislike Guyton. I think you like him more than I like him, or maybe the Korey likes him. But I'll say this: he's probably my least favorite of all of that list of choices. We would trade down would have been really in order because
I would have loved to trade down. I just didn't feel like we had a good picks there. So
I got you. So right after the Steelers pick J.C. Latham, Brian Thomas, Michael Penix, Jackson Powers Johnson, Cooper DeJean, Chop Robinson. We're losing people left and right. Graham Barton just went. Jordan Morgan. Oh, Ruke Ofronoro, went early. That's earlier than I expected. And then Byron Murphy went after him at pick 43. Also interesting. Yeah, we'll go back and review. And there's what I was expecting to happen, but dreading. We'll get to that in a second. By the way, this time I'm going to be offensive coordinator. Korey is going to pick. And Jeremy, you'll be pitching defense.
Don't pick.
Here's what happened after the Steelers pick at number 20. I mentioned down to Cooper DeJean, Chop Robinson, Johnny Newton at 27, A.D. Mitchell at 28 to the Bills. They're thrilled. Kool-Aid McKinstry, Darius Robinson, Xavier Worthy, Keon Coleman, Graham Barton, Ruke, Jordan Morgan. I think, by the way, Ruke was on Scooby-Doo, pretty sure. It's Jordan Morgan, Tyler Nubin, TJ Tampa, the cornerback from Iowa State at 37. Wow, that's high for him. Trey Benson, also high for him at 38. He's great, though. Max Melton at 39. That's a drag. Lad McConkey at 40. Kingsley Sumayatea at number 41. Kamari Lassiter, Byron Murphy, Bo Nix, Christian Haynes, Cooper Beebe, Cameron Kitchens, Ennis Rackestra, and Xavier Legette to the Bengals. You're going to have to face him twice a year now.
And Troy Franklin right before we're picked.
Will, let me have DC. Don't make me pick from that person on the board.
Well, we know who you're going to pick. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Well, we have options later, but I would like to play that out.
Yeah, no, you're picking.
Okay.
I'm offense, right?
Yes, you're offense, I'm defense.
Okay, so here's what I think. We lost the three wide receivers that I thought were in range for us. Either first, either pulling one at pick 20 and biting the bullet and just dealing with having to get a tackle and a center later, or maybe somebody would fall to 51. But we lost A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Legette, who I think is a A.J. Brown clone that would probably really work for Arthur Smith. Would be like the happiest person in Pittsburgh. And then Brian Thomas, who we passed on at 20. All of those guys gone at wide receiver. That puts us in the position of wide receiver where there's a lot of talk about Malachi Corley or Polk. I think they're both slot guys of different kinds, and Corley's a good football player. So we'll start with him. Malachi Corley, the wide receiver from Western Kentucky. He will be a great addition to any team. Like I said, I don't know if he's a fit for what the Steelers really want to do. Roman Wilson is a willing blocker and is a sort of a one-trick pony speed slot guy who doesn't do anything that's really super exciting or except for run over the top from the slot against slower players generally. I'm not sure if that's going to work in the NFL, but I love his attitude and his willingness to A, block, and B, get 5 targets a game and be happy, which is not a small thing coming to an Arthur Smith offense. Otherwise, I think all the other receivers that I'd be interested in are all later. We picked a tackle. So those guys are off the board. I'm trying to think. It's really wide receiver for offense right now. Wide receiver, center. Yes, I don't think our running backs are necessarily super suited to run outside zone, but I don't think I'm spending a second round pick in this draft. That leaves the center that's been super connected to the Steelers for a long time now, Cedric Van Pran Granger. No, I'm kidding. Who also apparently, like a year ago, people were like, Tomlin loves Cedric Van Pran, man. He's going to pick on all Georgia line after he picks Mims in the first round, et cetera, et cetera. But there is Zach Frazier, the center from West Virginia, who somebody on this podcast has as his number one center in the draft and has been, all but in love with him for 2 years now. So I don't really need to go much further with my choices. Yes, there are center choices later that I like. I love Hunter Norzad, who I think will be available at least around later. But yeah, Zach Frazier is a good player. And once again, not positive about his fit for, quick out of your stance, offensive line with movement on every play, but he's a really solid player, and he's the anti Kendrick Green in terms of steadiness and ability to play the position and polish. So hard to go too wrong.
All right, Will, let's flip it over to some defensive players for me. Again, I don't really see edge being, a need. We've got 2 pretty good guys. We spent a 4th on Nick Herbig from last year, who played well in spurts. He's a backup for a reason. So, guys like, Adiza Isaac there, Chris Braswell, not really guys we're looking for. Braylon Trice is an intriguing story, but he does not wow me athletically. He's more of a try-hard guy coming out of Washington. Doesn't wow you on tape, but incredibly solid. Leonard Taylor's a guy I've been a fan of. I took him for the Chiefs in our mock draft exercise earlier in the year. He strikes me as a guy that could be a Cam Hayward replacement. He does. He's got a similar athletic profile. They played him out of position. They played him a lot over center, a lot of zero tech, one tech. That's not where he's going to play in the pros. So I think his best football is ahead of him. So if, Korey, you're picking here, right? Yeah. So if you're feeling like you really want to get a defensive lineman, Leonard Taylor is up there for me. As far as linebacker
what's your take
goes,
on Michael Hall? Because to me, I look at this board of defensive players there, and that's the name that jumps out.
well, yeah, and that's the other direction I was going. The problem is it doesn't feel like the Steelers have shown much interest in these undersized tackles that really like to get upfield. We were sitting there in round one saying, man, Johnny Newton, Byron Murphy, those, if we didn't have such big needs, you'd hope we'd consider them. But, neither of those guys were brought in for official 30 visits with the Steelers. So it just shows you that I don't think they really value that 0-1 tech, quick penetrating type, which is too bad because Michael Hall's a hell of a player.
I mean, his pro day 299.
Yeah,
and ran a 4.75.
That's light in the NFL.
I understand, but it's not much different than Aaron Donald. To me, Aaron Donald is your prototypical, pass rushing 3 tech, right?
Mhm.
That to me is the guy when you think of a 3-4 base defense, you don't have those guys. But for the NFL, if you're going to play nickel 70% of the time, you need those guys in spades. Who do we have? Cam Hayward is like sort of a guy like that, not quite, But Michael Hall is also 20 years old. That's the thing. In previous years, they would have been all over the Ohio State Pro Day, and they've been all over this guy who was 20 years old, underclassman. But you're right. I think they've shown very, very little interest.
Yeah, the defensive linemen they have kind of shown interest in have been middle to late round guys, so I think they think that room's kind of stacked. Are there any corners on the board or safeties worth taking? I thought I saw
it feels so picked. I think for this round, like I'm offense, so this is really Korey's. I'll leave it to Korey to talk about safety, but
yeah. I mean, Javon Bullard, he's one of those guys that could actually be more of a slot, than actual safety. Kalen Bullock's a guy I liked early in the process. He's long and has range. But, I like some of those names, just maybe not right here.
I feel like corner next round and the one after that is going to be a target-rich environment.
Yeah, very well. That could be the ideal round for our slot cornerback. There's could be quite a few available there. So I'd say defensively, if there's someone that like really sticks out to me, it would be Leonard Taylor, just because I think he's going to be a better pro than he was in college, or just better player than he was in college, and could be that Cameron Hayward replacement. But I'm not really, banging my fist for any of these guys other than him, honestly.
Do it, Korey.
Zach Frazier. Yeah, I mean, I decided to go into this with an open mind once I saw who the top player was. But I mean, honestly, I feel like there's not really any other selection that stands out all that much. It seems like they want Keanu Benton at the 0 tech, which, I mean, I can't really fault him. He looked really good there. So I do think that negates Michael Hall. I think the Patrick Queen signing kind of kicks the can on linebacker until at least later if we want it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say this. I think my prediction is that I think there's a better chance of Jackson Powers Johnson making it to 51 than Zach Frazier. There's been some buzz with Zach Frazier not getting past 29 and maybe not even getting there.
I think he goes to Dallas. I don't know what number Dallas is, but I think that's
24.
where he goes.
I took him with Dallas's pick in the Steelers Fury mock. So
there's a lot of buzz for him to Dallas. I think he's a first rounder. Jackson Powers Johnson. There may not have been a lot of public news about this yet, but I have heard that there's a medical red flag for him that is serious enough that it may affect him. And like some of the guys in the past who were thought of as very highly rated prospects, like top top 30 type prospects like Jackson Powers Johnson, who had serious medical red flags, either ended up going middle of day 3 or even undrafted. I think back to who's the Notre Dame or Tennessee guard that went to Kansas City, had the heart problem.
Trey Smith.
Yeah, Trey Smith was undrafted, I think, right?
Yeah.
And you talk about the guys with some neck issues, spinal issues, or whatever. So it depends what the red flag is. I don't have any idea, but
I've heard it's knees.
Yeah, so I just like Darnell Washington is another guy that dropped. DeJuan Jones, another guy that dropped far below his talent level because of injury. So I'm just saying, I think Korey is 100% right. Much more likely that JPJ makes it to 42 or to 51. And here's the weird thing though about simulators versus real life. I don't think there are that many teams in the NFL who really have a big need for center. You can make an argument that Dallas has a big need, same as Pittsburgh. Detroit, Philly, and the Rams all have options on their roster, but they're looking. The word is that they're looking to upgrade, but that's still only 5 or 6 teams, including the Steelers.
Yeah.
So your chances of getting one of a plug and play starter at center are pretty good, even down through round 3 or 4, because there's just not that many teams that want one.
Yeah, I mean, I could have definitely been talked out of Zach Frazier if there was something super convincing. But I mean, he's the top player on the board right now too. This is just best player available, need everything. Plus, I've been a massive fan, so I get to take him in this, which I haven't gotten to.
Yeah,
really. And actually, I've taken him so far. I took him in drafted team and the.
You wanted to plant your flag, Korey. You've done it.
Right.
Yeah.
So now we go into round 3, where the Steelers have 2 picks. By the way, that was pick 51 in round 2. And
83 here, I believe, is coming up.
Yeah, it's 84. Yeah. Oh, you dirty bastard.
Cole Bishop.
Yeah. To me, Cole, well, I'll go through the picks that are selected for those of you listening on the radio, but yeah, it's happened to us now 2 picks in a row where there's somebody taking a pick or 2 ahead of the Steelers that I feel would be, I would have pounded the table for. So immediately after the Steelers pick at number 51, Adisa Isaac from Penn State, Edgerrin Cooper, linebacker, Chris Braswell, Peyton Wilson, Michael Hall, Leonard Taylor, Braylon Trice, Jalen Polk, Patrick Paul, Brandon Dorless, Malachi Corley, DJ James, Ben Sinnott, Devontae Walker from North Carolina, Kalen Carson, Chris Jenkins, a lineman from Michigan, Jonathan Brooks, Roger Rosengarten, Braden Fisk, a lineman that the Steelers have been connected to at number 70, Marshawn Nealand, Ricky Pearsall, Jalen McMillan, Chris Adams Drain, Will Shipley, Roman Wilson, Bo Braid, Dominic Pooney, DeChavian Sanders, James Williams, the linebacker / safety from Miami, Kalen Bullock from USC, and Cole Bishop from Utah. Immediately ahead of us, Kieran Amadevije from the lineman from Yale. By the way, before we go on, I just wanted to mention, the year that the Steelers took Kenny Pickett with the first pick, and they took George Pickens with the second pick, and I made the argument a year later that I'm less upset about it, because imagine if George Pickens were the first pick and Kenny Pickett were the second pick in the draft. If you told me, by the way, that Zach Frazier was our first pick and Tyler Guyton was our second pick, I'd feel pretty good about that. So yeah. It's funny. It's like, I think like that means you got good enough value at one of the 2 picks that you can deal with, whether you thought it was a perfect pick or not. That feels like 2 good enough picks. Kenny Pickett aside. Anyway, so all right, so I get to choose. Where are we now? Jeremy's defense.
I am
offense. Jeremy's offense.
Yep.
Jeremy's offense. Korey is defense, and I guess who wants to start?
I'll start.
We've picked and by the way, we picked Tyler Guyton, first round, pick 20, tackle out of Oklahoma, and Zach Frazier, the center out of West Virginia, at pick 51. So we've got our 2 offensive linemen. And now we're looking.
Let's grab another. Just joking.
Hey, not the worst idea I've heard. I'm all about building for the future. I don't think they're winning the Super Bowl this year anyway. So let's make a good team.
Right. Well, let's take a look at some offensive players here.
All defense on the top board.
I know, right? Maybe we should have let you start.
Well, what's funny about that is I think there are fewer defensive players of a certain tier in this draft So there's in this range, they're sort of top loaded, whereas there's more offensive players later or something. Like I feel like it's because of the imbalance in how many quality offensive and defensive players that there's going to be some parts of the board where we're just buried with one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, a lot of running backs. If you want a running back, now's a good time.
True. Yeah, I don't want to pick a running back. But obviously we talked about wide receiver earlier. It looks like Johnny Wilson's on the board. The gargantuan 6'7" wide receiver out of Florida State. Obviously that size is appealing. Don't get me wrong. Jermaine Burton, honestly, is a guy who's been pretty slept on this year, and I think it's because of just how top loaded this class is at wide receiver. I think in a bad year, he's probably a for sure round 2 pick, just because of his twitch, his ability to get down the field, reliable hands. I'm not sure if I'd call him a good blocker, but he tries. So that's something. But he kind of, I don't know if he fits the size profile exactly what Arthur Smith likes, but he's 6'1", probably right around 200 pounds. Yeah, or even a little shorter. So, this would kind of be that guy, more of along the lines of a Deontay Johnson size wise. Can't get on board with Malik Washington. I really like the player, but I feel like we have a Malik Washington, Calvin Austin.
By the way, my favorite wide receiver in the class, I think I would say, not best necessarily, but my favorite. I love Malik Washington.
It seems like Wil and Jeremy have some disagreements this draft. Just 5 minutes ago, Will's talking about how much he hated Jeremy's first round pick, and now
no, he didn't say he hated Malik Washington. He just said we have a similar player, which I agree with.
Yeah. I like Malik, but just I feel like that's redundant for what we have. I'm a big Jamari Thrash fan. I've been following him since his Georgia Southern days, or Georgia State. Correct me for whichever that was, but they're both in Georgia and smaller level. So
no, it's Georgia State. Yeah,
Georgia State. Okay, yeah, I couldn't remember. But
actually, no, I'm not. Actually, now I'm not sure.
Don't worry about it.
It's one or the other.
But
I
I'm
get
a
those
big
two schools
Thrash
really
fan.
confused. So.
Jeremy Thrash.
Let's see here. Georgia State. Good call.
Yeah.
Good call. But I'm a big Thrash fan just because I've been following him for a long time, so I'm probably a little biased, but he's a good all-around player. He's not going to wow you in any one particular facet, but he's really well-rounded. He'll block. He can go deep. He can run routes. Pretty good hands for the most part. He's had a few drops here and there where you wish you'd see him there. Brendan Rice is an intriguing option just because Tomlin loves bloodlines. Not to mention, he fits the more physical outside receiver that Arthur Smith would like at 6'3", 200 pounds. But so outside of wide receivers, let's go to tight ends. I feel like we can avoid offensive line since we went there with our first 2 picks. Yeah, that's what I thought. No one I really want to bang my table for. Other than Jaheim Bell. Jaheim Bell would be a very Arthur Smith-like pick with how much he liked using Jonnu Smith and all these different tight ends. And
Michael Pruitt, right? That's a Jaheim Bell.
Yeah, Michael Pruitt. He very talented guy, but I feel like we have a lot of tight ends on the roster, and I know they met with him. It's not an official 30 or whatever, but they met with him, whether it was at the Senior Bowl or Shrine Bowl, whichever bowl he was at.
Jeremy, I think Arthur Smith might have just wanted to be his friend.
So other than those wide receivers I mentioned, Jaheim Bell's an intriguing option. Well, one other wide receiver that's kind of one of my guys. I don't expect us to take him because he's a Malik Washington type. I'm a big fan of Jacob Cowing out of Arizona. The dude is just slippery as hell and reminds me, he is small because he's 5'8". But he reminded me of when I was watching tape of him, he reminded me of Deontay Johnson with his ability just to flat out lead people. His route running is unbelievable. His size is what's going to kill him at the next level, though. So whether he can be that effective for how long, but big fan of his outside of his diminutive size.
Just on Jacob Cowing, he kind of screams the profile that a team who takes a rookie quarterback this year is going to take him, and he's going to go for a cool like 700 yards or something like that just by being that guy's favorite target.
Just catch and run, right? It's like just feed him the ball when you don't know where else to go with it. Yeah, I totally could see that. And so if he goes to Carolina, he's the same size as the quarterback.
So I seize my argument is done. I'll let the defense state its case.
Yeah, I think I've had probably the easiest arguments and decisions so far. I mean, actually, this argument isn't that easy. I just kind of get to say some players and pass it off to Will. Looking at backers, I personally have Jeremiah Trotter over Grayne Coulson and Wallace, but we don't really. I mean, Trevin Wallace could kind of fit into the chase and run. Cedric Gray too, where the kind of more coverage types that we need. I think Trotter's the best zone linebacker, but like we said about the Patrick Queen sign, we're not really sure what we're doing with our linebackers. We have Patrick Queen and Landon Roberts, who both can't really cover,
and then Holcomb, who's working his way back for how long?
Maybe
he pulled pork, like he might not be back. So,
but I mean, here's a question: do you think they're going to give the green dot to Cole Holcomb and send Patrick Queen to the bench on third down? Because that's what a real NFL team would do. But I just they'll never take the Patrick Queen.
That's not what's happening. So, so I'm not, I'm not super bullish on any of these linebackers, especially with what our room looks like right now. Now, I definitely want to start, let's just go through. So go to D tackle.
Polarizing prospect at the top there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Smith is a big boy, athletic. There's a lot of buzz with the Steelers being interested. I personally think that there's enough options later that I'm not feeling jumping on him. But I mean, I think if he's the pick here, and he's kind of, when we do our prediction for the Steelers board, he's probably going to be my pick at 84 for the prediction.
Noting that he came on an official 30 visit too.
Yeah, he's probably going to be my prediction for pick 84 in real life. I think there's enough guys later. T'Vondre Sweat, polarizing as well. There's, issues with him being maybe a party animal and not being able to control his weight. I think he's going to slide past this in real life. Yeah. But we've looked at, all of us have been banging on the table for a true zero tech or true 0 and 1 tech for 3 years now. It just hasn't happened. I would be pretty surprised if he winds up being the pick at any point in the draft. Mekhi Wingo's a 3 tech, kind of got some pass rushing juice. I know some people are higher on
very
the wing.
Quick first step, but look at him, he's 284.
Yeah, I'm not even really, he's a 3 tech, but I don't think he'll be the guy. I know there are some Dwayne Carter fans. I'm not as big of a fan. Or not as big of a fan. I'm a little lower on him than about 3 of the other names here. McKinley Jackson plays super physical. There's a lot of good options, but I'm probably going to recommend a different position. I've already touched on the linebackers. Can we go to edge? Because I saw someone I just want to talk about. Yeah, Jonah Ellis at 152. That's
a sick joke.
That might be the biggest flaw on this board. I think Jonah Ellis might go in the first round. He had the best 3 cone for an edge ever, which is traditional.
Anybody over 240, I think, was either the best or very close to it.
Yeah, that's traditionally a very good predictor. That's the TJ Watt stat, pretty much. We don't need an edge. I would be happy with Jonah Ellis at pick 84, regardless of the circumstances. I think I liked him as a player. I didn't think he was going to test as well as he did. I mean, he tested like a freak. But so I'll stand my I'll plant my flag on Jonah Ellis. Corner and safety is where we really gotta dive in a little.
By the way, you like bloodlines. Before we get to corner and safety, Jonah Ellis his father played for the Lions. He has 3 brothers who all play in the NFL right now.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, one of his brothers is 362 pounds.
That's the Idaho tackle who went to the Eagles, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
I thought Javon Bullard. I've been a fan of Javon Bullard for a while. He's one of my better safeties. I'm not sure how much I would bang on the table for him as an every down slot, which is kind of what we're more looking for, which I think might be where he slots in. I kind of see him more as a chess piece more than anything, where I don't want to put him in the slot every down. I don't want to put him at, safety every down. Let him play a little box linebacker, let him play a little slot, let him play a little safety. That would be a good pick here. Dadrion Taylor Demerson has a lot of fans, especially in Pittsburgh. He tested like a super athlete, and the film, he's a headhunter. Hop over to corner, because those are the really only two that I'd really point out. Yeah, and this is where I really like. So Ardo Green, Mike Sainristil, Josh Newton, Andrew Phillips, Jerry and Jones all pop out. I'm a massive, massive, massive Mike Sainristil fan. He's a converted receiver to nickel. He's very physical. He plays above his weight. But, I mean, you could say that about, Renardo Green, too. Well, what's Renardo's green size listed at?
Well, this may not be accurate. This actually have a more accurate size. I'll tell you in a second.
But, Mike Sainristil is...
so, by the way, he tested it 5'11 and a half, 186.
Okay, so, I mean, slot profile.
Yeah.
So,
he's quite a hitter for that size, man.
Yes.
Physical player.
Josh Newton is, I think, maybe a little stickier in coverage than the other two. But, I'm a huge Mike Sainristil fan. I always have been since I saw him on defense. People compare him to Mike Hilton. I think he's got better tools to work with than Mike Hilton really did. And I think that if we want to start catching up with the rest of the NFL with putting their better, players in the slot and investing in the position, I'd be taking Mike Sainristil. I think, between Mike Sainristil, Renardo Green, Javon Bullard, Jonah Ellis, any of the D tackles, you've got good options here. I would be taking Mike Sainristil, but again, Renardo Green's really close to him too. Like I'm a big fan of Renardo Green as well.
Yeah, well, the position I'm in is I really like those two. I mean, basically, I'd be happy with Renardo Green or Mike Sainristil. I love Jonah Ellis. It's like I wouldn't count on this 152 being an accurate number. Like in a way, I don't want to pick him because I think he'll be long gone by this point.
Yeah.
So for realism's sake, as much as I would enjoy picking Jonah Ellis in the 4th or 5th round, I don't think that's happening. Not even before the workout, I think he was still a top 100 player, if not better than that. And I really like Mason Smith. I know that there are some options later, but there's not that many options later with that kind of upside and size. I just don't think I think he's an old school Steeler. Like when they ran more base and he could come in with a guy like that as a 5-tech to be Stephon Tuitt. Like, that's so funny that this profile mentioned Stephon Tuitt, who's a player I think he resembles the most, and David Irving. I don't remember David Irving from Iowa State, played for the Cowboys, but I was all over him. He was my favorite defensive lineman that year. He came out, had a lot of off the field issues that probably doomed his career, but those two were really disruptive, long, interior linemen that could, kick out to the 5-tech and or give you pass rush in nickel. And I really, really enjoyed them back in the day. Right now, I don't know. I think a slot, I've been saying this for like 5 years on this show, that slot corner or, the players you have in the slot, either a slot safety in big nickel or a slot corner, are premium players now in the NFL compared to what they used to be. There's so much of the action now comes down to those guys being able to do a lot. I have a very hard time choosing between Renardo Green and Mike Sainristil. This is what I'm thinking about doing for this pick. I don't think Sainristil will make it to the next pick, and I'm not even sure he'll really make it to 84 in real life. But it's pretty hard to not go with him. I mean, the advantage that Renardo Green has is he could probably play outside, whereas I don't think Sainristil is going to play outside for you. Do either of you guys disagree with that assessment?
No, that's what I was thinking too. It's kind of the same argument with Josh Newton. I feel like they're more likely to slide out. But if you want to take an outside corner or sign an outside corner or trade for an outside corner after Dante Jackson, I feel like Mike Sainristil is more likely the guy that you just play every down in the slot. Like, I feel like that's a guy you don't have to rotate. Renardo Green, is a little bit leaner, I think, not as thickly built, maybe more of an outside guy.
They're the same size, basically, which is funny because when you see them on tape, it doesn't really look that way, but they're close to the same size anyway. I'm going to go with Mike Sanders still. I feel like the idea of being able to take the ball away as much as he does, plus to be able to, as a slot player, you got to be like a good linebacker. You have to be able to play 3 levels. You have to be able to blitz and or attack the run behind the line of scrimmage and or screens behind the line of scrimmage. You have to be able to cover guys on quick routes near the line of scrimmage, and you have to be able to carry sometimes bigger receivers deep. So Sanders still is not necessarily like the tallest guy, but I think he's been pretty effective at carrying guys deep. A little concerned about his height, but very productive player. Played for in a good defensive system where he was coached well, and he'll be the best Haitian player in the history of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So at pick 84 rather, Mike Sanders still slot corner from Michigan. Anybody? Any complaints?
No.
Jeremy, you can tell me how much you hate it.
I don't hate it.
I hate picking a Michigan player. What can I say? It's bad.
No, that's drama you got to worry about, I think.
Not just him. It's in general. I do think the Michigan players haven't always panned out that well in the NFL. All right. So we lost Mason Smith. The picks after us: Cedric Gray, Malik Mustafa, the safety from Wake Forest, Junior Colson, Mason Smith to the Packers. Cedric Van Pran here went at 89, just for future reference, in case you're thinking about him falling further. Christian Mahogany at 90, Trevin Wallace, the linebacker from Kentucky at 91, Bernard R. Green at 92, Bullard at 93, Dwayne Carter, Jeremiah Trotter, Johnny Wilson, Andrew Phillips, quarterback Kentucky. The Bengals are killing this draft right now. They're annoying me.
Lovely. Yeah.
On that note, we're going to pause here at the end of the first half of our Steeler Fury Steelers mock draft war room. We'll pick it up in the next episode with the rest of the Steelers picks. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss any content, and check out the next episode for the rest of our Steelers mock draft.
Steeler Fury.